Hi, I'm Lane, and I'm going to be reading Superman and Me by Sherman Alexie and annotating. So to start with pre-reading strategies, um, from just reading the title, Superman and Me, I'm going to infer that his use of Superman and Me um, says that the story is going to be about someone that is heroic to him, someone that's an idol, whether it could be his father or some other important person in his life. And then in researching the author, a lot of his works are based on his experiences as a Native American and the ancestry of his and the culture of his tribe. So I'm gonna deepen that inference, I guess, to be that this Superman is going to be someone in his tribe, perhaps a tribal leader, or maybe it's something that his culture believes in that he might be considering Superman. So just to keep going, I learned to read with a Superman comic book, simple enough, I suppose. I cannot recall which particular Superman comic book I read, nor can I remember which villain he fought in that issue. I cannot remember the plot, nor the means by which I obtained the comic book. What I can remember is this. I was 3 years old, a Spokane Indian boy living with his family on the Spokane Indian Reservation in eastern Washington state. So, this paragraph makes me think about a personal account, so text to self. My best friend this summer actually student taught on a Native American reservation in South Dakota, and she shared with me how the lifestyle was out there for them, and she described how the reservations were incredibly poverty stricken, and not just the reservation that she was in, but most of them actually struggle with poverty. So I think that he might touch on this, perhaps, and use it in his story. I guess use the struggles that he had with it. So I'll keep going. We were poor by most standards, but one of my parents usually managed to find some minimum wage job or another, which made us middle class by reservation standards. So just there, my text to self note that I made earlier, it did affect him, the economic threshold that they had, I guess. I had a brother and 3 sisters. We lived on a combination of irregular paychecks, hope, fear, and government surplus food. My father, who was one of the few Indians who went to Catholic school on purpose, was an avid reader of Westerns. So here I see that he's based off of knowledge that I already had, referencing the Americanization and the assimilation of Native Americans through the use of boarding schools. We studied this in high school, and there was one in my hometown, so it was something that we discussed in school, and how they forced Christianity on the students there in order to Americanize them and shed them of their Native American culture. They had the phrase, save the boy, kill the Indian, which is a really shameful part of my past, I think. Moving on, my father, who was one of the few Indians who went to Catholic school on purpose, was an avid reader of westerns, spy thrillers, murder mysteries, gangster epics, basketball player biographies, and anything else he could find. He bought his books by the pound at Dutch's Pawn Shop, Goodwill, Salvation Army, and Value Village. When he had extra money, he bought new novels at supermarkets, convenience stores, and hospital gift shops. Our house was filled with books. They were stacked in crazy piles in the bathroom, bedrooms, and living room. In a fit of unemployment-inspired creative energy, my father built a set of bookshelves and so on filled them with random assortments of books. So here, I just want to note how visual it is to me. I can picture walking into someone's house and having them be such a reading fanatic that you have to go through a maze of their books just to get anywhere in the house, and how it would fill, counters and shelves, and everywhere there's just tons of books. And I don't know why, but I almost picture them as being dusty books, just because having so many, you'd have to start to have stacks that don't get touched. But continuing, my father built a set of bookshelves and so on, filled them with a random assortment of books about the Kennedy assassination, Watergate, the Vietnam War, and the entire 23-book series of the Apache Westerns. My father loved books, and since I love my father with an aching devotion, I decided to love books as well. So, noting just the importance here between his relationship with his father and him, and how his love of books, it stems from his father. So I think that those are going to be the two main things here. His relationship with his father, and perhaps his relationship with books. So, I can remember picking up my father's books before I could read. The words themselves were mostly foreign, but I still remember the exact moment when I first understood, with a sudden clarity, the purpose of a paragraph. I didn't have the vocabulary to say paragraph, but I realized that a paragraph was a fence that held words. The words inside a paragraph worked together for a common purpose. They had some specific reasons for being inside the same fence. This knowledge delighted me. I began to think of everything in terms of paragraphs. Our reservation was a small paragraph within the United States. My family's house was a paragraph distinct from the other paragraphs of the Lebrett's to the north, the Fords to our south, and the tribal school to the west. Inside our house, each family member existed as a separate paragraph, but still had genetics and common experiences to link us. Now, using this logic, I can see my changed family as an essay of 7 paragraphs. My mother, father, older brother, the deceased sister, my younger twin sisters, and our adopted little brother. At the same time I was seeing the world in paragraphs, I also picked up that Superman comic book. So here, I think that there's going to be a shift in tone from almost reminiscent and discussing what seemed to have been, for the most part, fond memories. And I think it's going to go into a more serious tone, more, this is the root of what I'm trying to get out of writing this. Just because he starts with, at the same time I was seeing the world in paragraphs, I also picked up that Superman comic book, which leaves it kind of like the Superman comic book was something of importance. So each panel, complete with picture, dialogue, and narrative, was a 3-dimensional paragraph. In one panel, the Superman breaks through a door. His suit is red, blue, and yellow. The brown door shatters into many pieces. I look at the narrative above the picture. I cannot read the words, but I assume it tells me that Superman is breaking down the door. Aloud, I pretend to read the words and say, Superman is breaking down the door. Words, dialogue, also flow out of Superman's mouth. Because he is breaking down the door, I assume he says, I am breaking down the door. Once again, I pretend to read the words and say aloud, I am breaking down the door. In this way, I learn to read. So, here, I think it's important to note the author's craft, where he repeats, 6 times that Superman is breaking down the door. So, I think that it's not going to be clean cut here that he means Superman is breaking down the door, but I think that there's something behind it. So someone is breaking down the door, breaking the glass ceiling, proving themselves in a way that isn't expected of them, of sorts, because of how he continues to repeat and emphasize, I am breaking down the door. In this way, I learned to read, he says. So perhaps reading is what helps him break down some sort of barrier that he has in his life. Okay, so continuing. This might be an interesting story all by itself. A little Indian boy teaches himself to read at an early age and advances quickly. He reads Grapes of Wrath in kindergarten, when other children are struggling through Dick and Jane. If he'd been anything but an Indian boy living on the reservation, he might have been called a prodigy. But he, as an Indian boy living on the reservation, is simply an oddity. I want to note that I think it's funny and creative that the author used the words prodigy and oddity, both for their meaning, but also because I think the convenience of them rhyming makes the sentence more impactful, as he's emphasizing what I take as the stereotypes that society has about Native Americans and the oppression that we've forced on them, pretty much. So I think it's sort of comic that he has prodigy, but it's simply an oddity. Continuing, he grows into a man who often speaks of his childhood in the third person, as if it will somehow dull the pain and make him sound more modest about his talents. A smart Indian is a dangerous person, widely feared and ridiculed by Indians and non-Indians alike. Here, I think, confirms what I mentioned earlier, that he's talking about the oppression of Native Americans, when he says, a smart Indian is a dangerous person, widely feared and ridiculed by Indians and non-Indians alike. So, in the way that we stereotypically identify them and almost force onto them to remain uneducated, he's saying that a smart Indian is dangerous. Maybe he's implying that an educated Indian, and even person in general, can really make a difference and fight back on that oppression that's on top of them. So, I fought with my classmates on a daily basis. They wanted me to stay quiet when the non-Indian teacher asked for questions, for volunteers, for help. We were Indian children who were expected to be stupid. Most lived up to those expectations inside the classroom, but subverted them on the outside. They struggled with basic reading in school, but could remember how to sing a few dozen powwow songs. They were monosyllabic in front of their non-Indian teachers, but could tell complicated stories and jokes at the dinner table. They submissively ducked their heads down when confronted by a non-Indian adult, but would slug it out with the Indian bully who was 10 years older. As Indian children, we were expected to fail in the non-Indian world. So here, just making me think of institutionalized discrimination that often happens within schools. I think he's touching on it. As Indian children, we were expected to fail in the non-Indian world. Those who failed were ceremonially accepted by other Indians and appropriately pitied by non-Indians. So again, I think referencing institutionalized discrimination. I refused to fail. I was smart. I was arrogant. I was lucky. I read books late into the night until I could barely keep my eyes open. I read books at recess, then during lunch, and in the few minutes left after I had finished my classroom assignments. I'd read books in the car when my family traveled to powwows or basketball games. In shopping malls, I ran in bookstores and read bits and pieces of as many books as I could. I read the books my father brought home from the pawn shops and second hands. I read the books I borrowed from the library. I read the backs of cereal boxes. I read the newspaper. I read the bulletins posted on the walls of the school, the clinic, the tribal offices, the post office. I read junk mail. I read auto repair manuals. I read magazines. I read anything that had words and paragraphs. I read with equal parts joy and desperation. I loved those books, but I also knew that love had only one purpose. I was trying to save my life. So, determining importance here, I think the most important paragraph and most influential paragraph in the nonfiction piece, I think that he's intentionally using this as a message to say that reading saved him. Reading took him away from the struggles of his home life, the struggles of his school life. And I think what he's trying to imply is that if you read, you can have a better life, have a more fulfilling life. Reading can save your life. So just want to note that this is what I think to be the most important paragraph in the piece. Despite all the books I read, I'm still surprised I became a writer. I was going to be a pediatrician. These days I write novels, short stories, and poems. I visit schools and teach creative writing to Indian kids. In all my years in the reservation school system, I was never taught how to write poetry, short stories, or novels. I was certainly never taught that Indians wrote poetry, short stories, and novels. Writing was something beyond Indians. I cannot recall a single time that a guest teacher visited the reservation. There must have been visiting teachers. Who were they? Where are they now? Do they exist? I visit the school as often as possible. The Indian kids crowd the classroom. Many are writing their own poems, short stories, and novels. They've read my books. They have read many other books. They look at me with bright eyes and arrogant wonder. They are trying to save their lives. Then there are the sullen and already defeated Indian kids who sit in the back rows and ignore me with theatrical precision. The pages of their notebooks are empty. They carry neither pencil nor pen. They stare out the window. They refuse and resist. Books, I say to them. Books, I say. I throw my weight against their locked doors. Their door holds. I am smart. I am arrogant. I am lucky. I am trying to save our lives. So here, I want to note first the mood that this piece gives me. The way that it makes me feel is kind of somber and just overall a bad kind of gut-wrenching feeling about the realities that not only poor people face, that not only minorities face, but also him and these kids. I think it's eye-opening to read a story, especially a nonfiction account, where he's taking his personal stories and the way that they really are. They really do lack the privileges that I have been lucky enough to have. So it just makes me realize and makes me look back and reflect on myself. And then from there, I think in his writing strategies, I think he does a good job in the ending of emphasizing again his point that books can can make can give you a better life. So overall, what I think he's saying is that if that you can break stereotypes, you can break being oppressed. You need to stop the cycle, and reading and educating yourself can do that. So I think that's his main message, and I think that his audience is to all people that are stuck in it. All people that are discriminated against, all people who um, don't don't enjoy the same privileges that some of us do.